In his discussion on Treatise on Angels from his Summa Theologica, St. Thomas Aquinas explains that angels, like humans, possess free will. He came to these conclusions by using a method known as disputatio, which explores theological truths through structured questioning, local reasoning, and coming to a final reconciliation, while referencing authoritative texts and sources throughout his writings. Whether you're reading this Summa Theologia on your own or listening to me read it, if you do find it difficult to follow along, don't feel stressed out. It's not uncommon. I would recommend to look up the video titled How Do You Read an Article of the Summa Theologia, Aquinas 101 by Father Gregory Pine, and you can find it here on YouTube. Father Pine provides a brief explanation of how to best mentally prepare for reading this 1200 century work. Welcome, I am Daisy, your hostess. If you have been following along, we are now at video 4 of 6 on the Treatise on Angels. If you are new and found me at this video, glad you found me. Make sure to visit my playlist for the earlier Treatise on Angels. There were a total of 14 on this topic, which were numbered from 50 to 64 under the heading of the Treatise on Angels. We have covered much ground, and yet more is left to discover, as Thomas Aquinas sets the inquiry regarding free will as it applies to angels. We walk away with the impression that Aquinas portrays the angels' will as free, rational, and perfectly oriented toward the divine good, with their choices ultimately rooted in their knowledge and love of God. And he does this by the method that we just talked about earlier. And at the cost of sounding altruistic, for I know I have many faults, which is why it's so easy to identify when I'm in grace or in virtue, and it's this idea of surrendering one's will to God, rooted in the essence of love for the divine, as having that as the fountain of all that is good and beautiful. I've noticed in my own life, and maybe some of you have too, that when I've tried to go at it by myself, I can do this, and I've got this, I find I struggle so much. And it's this myopic view of the limitations of my own resources and my own knowledge. But when I surrender and just turn it over to the loving God that is our beautiful creator, then things all of a sudden like magic start to happen. I get phone calls, people reach out, opportunities show up, a new way is made, and it's like, why don't I remember this, right? And this is, maybe life could be so much easier. And it's not that you don't show up. Yes, you do show up and you do your part as much and as best as you can, but also realize that there's something greater, something that makes sure that that sun is shining, and that the water's flowing, and that the air that we're breathing is perfect the way that we're taking it in. And one of the things I could say, what is this essence of love? The eros that the Greeks talk about. And it is all that is good and beautiful, which with no doubt many of us, and maybe you, have had those moments when either looking at a splendid view of nature, be it the sky, the ocean, a serene forest, a mountain range, or a flowered valley, we are left with no words to describe what majesty we are seeing. These divine moments are ineffable. Sometimes I wonder if there would be progress in a world where everyone acted from an expression of love. I don't know. What do you think? Leave me a comment. Let me know you were here. And let's go find out about angels and free will. We now continue with the Summa Theologia of St. Thomas Aquinas, translated from the Latin by Fathers of the English Dominican Province, Treatise on Angels, 58 through 59. Of the mode of angelic knowledge, 7 articles. After the foregoing, we have now to treat of the mode of the angelic knowledge, concerning which there are 7 points of inquiry. 1. Whether the angel's intellect be sometimes in potentiality and sometimes in act. 2. Whether the angel can understand many things at the same time. 3. Whether the angel's knowledge is discursive. 4. Whether he understands by composing and dividing. 5. Whether there can be error in the angel's intellect. 6. whether his knowledge can be styled as morning and evening. 7. Whether the morning and evening knowledge are the same or do they differ? First question, whether the angel's intellect is sometimes in potentiality, sometimes in act. Objection 1. It would seem that the angel's intellect is sometimes in potentiality and sometimes in act. For movement is the act of what is in potentiality, as stated in Physics 3:6. But the angels' minds are moved by understanding, as Dionysius says. Therefore, the angelic minds are sometimes in potentiality. Objection 2. Further, since desire is of a thing not possessed but possible to have, whoever desires to know anything is in potentiality thereto. But it is said, on whom the angels desire to look. Therefore, the angel's intellect is sometimes in potentiality. Objection 3. Further, in the book De Causis, it is stated that an intelligence understands according to the mode of its substance, but the angel's intelligence has some admixture of potentiality. Therefore, it sometimes understands potentially. On the contrary, Augustine says, since the angels were created in the eternity of the Word, they enjoy holy and devout contemplation. Now, a contemplating intellect is not in potentiality, but in act. Therefore, the intellect of an angel is not in potentiality. I answer that, as the philosopher states in De Anima 3, text 8, and Physics 8:32, the intellect is in potentiality in two ways. First, as before learning or discovering, that is, before it has the habit of knowledge. Secondly, as when it possesses the habit of knowledge, but does not actually consider. In the first way, an angel's intellect is never in potentiality with regard to the things to which his natural knowledge extends. For as the higher, namely the heavenly, bodies have no potentiality to existence which is not fully actuated, in the same way the heavenly intellects, the angels, have no intelligible potentiality which is not fully completed by connatural intelligible species. But with regard to things divinely revealed to them, there is nothing to hinder them from being in potentiality, because even the heavenly bodies are at times in potentiality to being enlightened by the sun. In the second way, an angel's intellect can be in potentiality with regard to things learnt by natural knowledge, for he is not always actually considering everything that he knows by natural knowledge, but as to the knowledge of the Word and of the things he beholds in the Word, he is never in this way in potentiality, because he is always actually beholding the Word and the things he sees in the Word. For the bliss of the angels consists in such vision, and beatitude does not consist but in act, as the philosopher says. Reply to objection 1. Movement is taken there not as the act of something imperfect, that is, of something existing in potentiality, but as the act of something perfect, that is, of one actually existing. In this way, understanding and feeling are termed movements, as stated in De Anima 3, text 28. Reply to objection 2. Such desire on the part of the angels does not exclude the object desired, but weariness thereof. Or they are said to desire the vision of God with regard to fresh revelations, which they receive from God to fit them for the task which they have to perform. Reply to objection 3. In the angel's substance there is no potentiality divested of act. In the same way, the angel's intellect is never so in potentiality as to be without act. Next question, whether an angel can understand many things at the same time? Objection 1. It would seem that an angel cannot understand many things at the same time, for the philosopher Aristotle says in Topic 2:4 that it may happen that we know many things, but understand only one. Objection 2. Further, nothing is understood unless the intellect be informed by an intelligible species, just as the body is formed by shape, but one body cannot be formed into many shapes. Therefore, neither can one intellect simultaneously understand various intelligible things. Objection 3. Further, to understand is a kind of movement, but no movement terminates in various terms. Therefore, many things cannot be understood altogether. On the contrary, Augustine says, "The spiritual faculty of the angelic mind comprehends most easily at the same time all things that it wills." I answer that, as unity of term is requisite for unity of movement, so is unity of object required for unity of operation. Now it happens that several things may be taken as several or as one, like the parts of a continuous whole. For if each of the parts be considered severally, they are many. Consequently, neither by sense nor by intellect are they grasped by one operation, nor all at once. In another way, they are taken as forming one in the whole, and so they are grasped both sense and intellect all at once and by one operation, as long as the entire continuous whole is considered, as is stated in De Anima 3, text 23. In this way, our intellect understands together both the subject and the predicate as forming parts of one proposition, and also two things compared together, according as they agree in one point of comparison. From this it is evident that many things, insofar as they are distinct, cannot be understood at once, but insofar as they are comprised under one intelligible concept, they can be understood together. Now, everything is actually intelligible according as its image is in the intellect. All things, then, which can be known by one intelligible species are known as one intelligible object, and therefore are understood simultaneously, but things known by various intelligible species are apprehended as different intelligible objects. Consequently, by such knowledge as the angels have of things through the word, they know all things under one intelligible species, which is the divine essence. Therefore, as regards such knowledge, they know all things at once. Just as in heaven, our thoughts will not be fleeting, going and returning from one thing to another, but we shall survey all our knowledge at the same time by one glance. As Augustine says, "But by that knowledge wherewith the angels know things by innate species, they can at one time know all things, which can be comprised under one species, but not such as are under various species." Reply to Objection 1. To understand many things as one is, so to speak, to understand one thing. Reply to Objection 2. The intellect is informed by the intelligible species which it has within it, so it can behold at the same time many intelligible objects under one species, as one body can by one shape be likened to many bodies. To the third objection, the answer is the same as the first. The next question, whether an angel's knowledge is discursive. Objection 1. It would seem that the knowledge of an angel is discursive, for the discursive movement of the mind comes from one thing being known through another, but the angels know one thing through another, for they know creatures through the word. Therefore, the intellect of an angel knows by discursive method. Objection 2. Further, whatever a lower power can do, the higher can do, but the human intellect can syllogize and know causes in effects, all of which is the discursive method. Therefore, the intellect of the angel, which is higher in the order of nature, can with greater reason do this. Objection 3. Further, Isidore in De Sum Bono 1:10 says that demons learn more things by experience, but experimental knowledge is discursive, for one experience comes of many remembrances, and one universal from many experiences, as Aristotle observes, therefore, an angel's knowledge is discursive. On the contrary, Dionysius says that the angels do not acquire divine knowledge from separate discourses, nor are they led to something particular from something common. I answer that, as has often been stated, the angels hold that grade among spiritual substances which the heavenly bodies hold among corporeal substances, for Dionysius calls them heavenly minds. Now, the difference between heavenly and earthly bodies is this, that earthly bodies obtain their last perfection by chance and movement, while the heavenly bodies have their last perfection at once from their very nature. So likewise the lower, namely the human, intellects obtain their perfection in the knowledge of truth by a kind of movement and discursive intellectual operation, that is to say, as they advance from one known thing to another. But if from the knowledge of a known principle they were straightway to perceive as known all its consequent conclusions, then there would be no discursive process at all. Such is the condition of the angels, because in the truths which they know naturally, they at once behold all things whatsoever that can be known in them. Therefore they are called intellectual beings, because even with ourselves the things which are instantly grasped by the mind are said to be understood intelligii. Hence intellect is defined as the habit of first principles, but human souls which acquire knowledge of truth by the discursive method are called rational, and this comes of the feebleness of their intellectual light. For if they possess the fullness of intellectual light like the angels, then in the first aspect of principles they would at once comprehend their whole range by perceiving whatever could be reasoned out from them. Reply to objection 1. Discursion expresses movement of a kind. Now all movement is from something before to something after. Hence discursive knowledge comes about according as from something previously known one attains to the knowledge of what is afterwards known, and which was previously unknown. But if in the thing perceived something else be seen at the same time as an object and its image are seen simultaneously in a mirror, it is not discursive knowledge. In this way the angels know things in the word. Reply to objection 2. The angels can syllogize in the sense of knowing a syllogism, and they see effects in causes and causes in effects, yet they do not acquire knowledge of an unknown truth in this way, by syllogizing from causes to effects or from effect to cause. Reply to objection 3. Experience is affirmed of angels and demons simply by way of similitude, forasmuch as they know sensible things which are present, yet without any discursion withal. The next question, whether the angels understand by composing and dividing? Objection 1. It would seem that the angels understand by composing and dividing. For where there is multiplicity of things understood, there is composition of the same, as is said in De Anima 3, text 21. But there is a multitude of things understood in the angelic mind, because angels apprehend different things by various species, and not all at one time. Therefore there is composition and division in the angel's mind. Objection 2. Further, negation is far more remote from affirmation than any two opposite natures are, because the first of distinctions is that of affirmation and negation, but the angel knows certain distant natures not by one, but by diverse species, as is evident from what was said. Therefore he must know affirmation and negation by diverse species, and so it seems that he understands by composing and dividing. Objection 3. Further, speech is a sign of the intellect, but in speaking to men, angels use affirmative and negative expressions, which are signs of composition and of division in the intellect, as is manifest from many passages of sacred scripture. Therefore it seems that the angel understands by composing and dividing. On the contrary, Dionysius says that the intellectual power of the angel shines forth with the clear simplicity of divine concepts. But a simple intelligence is without composition and division. Therefore the angel understands without composition or division. I answer that, as in the intellect when reasoning, the conclusion is compared with the principle, so in the intellect composing and dividing, the predicate is compared with the subject. For if our intellect were to see at once the truth of the conclusion in the principle, it would never understand by discursion and reasoning. In like manner, if the intellect, in apprehending the quiddity of the subject, were at once to have knowledge of all that can be attributed to or removed from the subject, it would never understand by composing and dividing, but only by understanding the essence. Thus it is evident that for the selfsame reason our intellect understands by discursion and by composing and dividing, namely, that in the first apprehension of anything newly apprehended, it does not at once grasp all that is virtually contained in it. And this comes from the weakness of the intellect light within us, as has been said. Hence, since the intellectual light is perfect in the angel, for he is a pure and most clear mirror, as Dionysius says, it follows that, as the angel does not understand by reasoning, so neither does he by composing and dividing. Nevertheless, he understands the composition and the division enunciations, just as he apprehends the reasoning of syllogisms, for he understands simply such things as are composite, things movable immovably, and material things immaterially. Reply to Objection 1. Not every multitude of things understood causes composition, but a multitude of such things understood that one of them is attributed to or denied of another. When an angel apprehends the nature of anything, he at the same time understands whatever can be either attributed to it or denied of it. Hence, in apprehending a nature, he by one simple perception grasps all that we can learn by composing and dividing. Reply to Objection 2. The various natures of things differ less as to their mode of existing than do affirmation and negation. Yet, as to the way in which they are known, affirmation and negation have something more in common, because directly the truth of an affirmation is known, the falsehood of the opposite negation is known also. Reply to Objection 3. The fact that angels use affirmative and negative forms of speech shows that they know both composition and division, and not that they know by composing and dividing, but by knowing simply the nature of a thing. Next question. Whether there can be falsehood in the intellect of an angel? Objection 1. It would seem that there can be falsehood in the angel's intellect, for perversity appertains to falsehood. But as Dionysius says, there is a perverted fancy in the demons. Therefore it seems that there can be falsehood in the intellect of the angels. Objection 2. Further, nescience is the cause of estimating falsely. But as Dionysius says, in the hierarchy of angels, there can be nescience in the angels. Therefore it seems there can be falsehood in them. Objection 3. Further, everything which falls short of the truth of wisdom and which has a depraved reason has falsehood or error in its intellect. But Dionysius affirms this of the demons. Therefore it seems that there can be error in the minds of the angels. On the contrary, the philosopher Aristotle says from De Anima 3, text 41, that the intelligence is always true. Augustine likewise says that nothing but what is true can be the object of intelligence. Therefore, there can be neither deception nor falsehood in the angel's knowledge. I answer that. The truth of this question depends partly upon what has gone before, for it has been said that an angel understands not by composing and dividing, but by understanding what a thing is. Now, the intellect is always true as regards what a thing is, just as the sense regarding its proper object, as is said in De Anima 3, text 26. But by accident, deception and falsehood creep in. when we understand the essence of a thing by some kind of composition, and this happens either when we take the definition of one thing for another, or when the parts of a definition do not hang together, as if we were to accept as the definition of some creature a four-footed flying beast, for there is no such animal. And this comes about in things composite, the definition of which is drawn from diverse elements, one of which is as matter to the other. But there is no room for error in understanding simple quiddities, as is stated in Metaphysics 9, text 22, for either they are not grasped at all, and so we know nothing respecting them, or else they are known precisely as they exist. So therefore, no falsehood, error, or deception can exist of itself in the mind of an angel. Yet it does so happen accidentally, but very differently from the way it befalls us. For we sometimes get at the quiddity of a thing by a composing and dividing process, as when, by division and demonstration, we seek out the truth of a definition. Such is not the method of the angels, but through the knowledge of the essence of a thing they know everything that can be said regarding it. Now it is quite evident that the quiddity of a thing can be a source of knowledge with regard to everything belonging to such a thing, or excluded from it, but not of what may be dependent on God's supernatural ordinance. Consequently, owing to their upright will, from their knowing the nature of every creature, the good angels form no judgment as to the nature of the qualities therein, save under the divine ordinance. Hence there can be no error or falsehood in them. But since the minds of demons are utterly perverted from the divine wisdom, they at times form their opinions of things simply according to the natural conditions of the same. Nor are they ever deceived as to the natural properties of anything. But they can be misled with regard to supernatural matters. For example, on seeing a dead man, they may suppose that he will not rise again, or, on beholding Christ, they may judge him not to be God. From all this, the answers to the objections of both sides of the questions are evident, for the perversity of the demons comes of their not being subject to the divine wisdom, while nescience is in the angels as regard things knowable, not naturally but supernaturally. It is furthermore evident that their understanding of what a thing is always true, save accidentally according as it is, in an undue manner, referred to some composition or division. Next question: whether there is a morning and an evening knowledge in the angels? Objection 1. It would seem that there is neither an evening nor a morning knowledge in the angels, because evening and morning have an admixture of darkness, but there is no darkness in the knowledge of an angel, since there is no error, no falsehood. Therefore the angelic knowledge ought not to be termed morning and evening knowledge. Objection 2. Further, between evening and morning the night intervenes, while noonday falls between morning and evening. Consequently, if there be a morning and an evening knowledge in the angels, for the same reason it appears that there ought to be a noonday and a night knowledge. Objection 3. Further, knowledge is diversified according to the difference of the objects known. Hence the philosopher Aristotle says in De Anima 3, text 38, the sciences are divided just as things are, but there is a threefold existence of things, to wit, in the word, in their own natures, and in the angelic knowledge, as Augustine observes. If therefore a morning and an evening knowledge be admitted in the angels because of the existence of things in the word and in their own nature, then there ought to be admitted a third class of knowledge on account of the existence of things in the angelic mind. On the contrary, Augustine divides the knowledge of the angels into morning and evening knowledge. I answer that the expression morning and evening knowledge was devised by Augustine, who interprets the 6 days wherein God made all things, not as ordinary days measured by the solar circuit, since the sun was only made on the 4th day, but as one day, namely the day of angelic knowledge as directed to 6 classes of things. As in the ordinary day, morning is the beginning, and evening the close of day, so their knowledge of the primordial being of things is called morning knowledge, and this is according as things exist in the Word. But their knowledge of the very being of the thing created as it stands in its own nature, it termed evening knowledge, because the being of things flows from the Word as from a kind of primordial principle, and this flow is terminated in the being which they have in themselves. Reply to Objection 1. Evening and morning knowledge in the angelic knowledge are not taken as compared to an admixture of darkness, but as compared to beginning and end. Or else it can be said, as Augustine puts it, that there is nothing to prevent us from calling something light in comparison with one thing and darkness with respect to another. In the same way, the life of the faithful and the just is called light in comparison with the wicked, according to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 8. You were heretofore darkness, but now light in the Lord. Yet this very life of the faithful, when set in contrast to the life of glory, is termed darkness, according to 2nd book of Peter, chapter 1, verse 19. You have the firm prophetic word, whereunto you do well to attend, as to a light that shineth in a dark place. So the angel's knowledge by which he knows things in their own nature is day in comparison with ignorance or error, yet it is dark in comparison with the vision of the Word. Reply to Objection 2. The morning and evening knowledge belong to the day, that is, to the enlightened angels, who are quite apart from the darkness, that is, from the evil spirits. The good angels, while knowing the creature, do not adhere to it, for that would be to turn to darkness and to night. But they refer this back to the praise of God, in whom, as in their principle, they know all things. Consequently, after evening, there is no night, but morning, so that morning is the end of the preceding day and the beginning of the following, insofar as the angels refer to God's praise, their knowledge of the preceding work. Noonday is comprised under the name of day as the middle between the two extremes, or else the noon can be referred to their knowledge of God Himself, who has neither beginning nor end. Reply to Objection 3. The angels themselves are also creatures. Accordingly, the existence of things in the angelic knowledge is comprised under evening knowledge, as also the existence of things in their own nature. Next question. Whether the morning and evening knowledge are one? Objection 1. It would seem that the morning and the evening knowledge are one, for it is said, there was evening and morning one day, from the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 5. But the expression day, the knowledge of the angels, is to be understood, as Augustine says, therefore the morning and evening knowledge of the angels are one and the same. Objection 2. Further, it is impossible for one faculty to have two operations at the same time, but the angels are always using their morning knowledge because they're always beholding God and things in God, according to Matthew chapter 18, verse 10. Therefore, if the evening knowledge were different from the morning, the angel could never exercise his evening knowledge. Objection 3. Further, the Apostle says in the first book of Corinthians chapter 13, verse 10, when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. But if the evening knowledge be different from the morning, it is compared to it as the less perfect to the perfect. Therefore, the evening knowledge cannot exist together with the morning knowledge. On the contrary, Augustine says there is a vast difference between knowing anything as it is in the Word of God and as it is in its own nature, so that the former belongs to the day and the latter to the evening. I answer that, As was observed, the evening knowledge is that by which the angels know things in their proper nature. This cannot be understood as if they drew their knowledge from the proper nature of things, so that the preposition in denotes the form of a principle, because, as has been already stated, the angels do not draw their knowledge from things. It follows, then, that when we say in their proper nature, we refer to the aspect of the thing known insofar as it is an object of knowledge. That is to say, that the evening knowledge is in the angels insofar as they know the being of things which those things have in their own nature. Now they know this through a twofold medium, namely by innate ideas or by the forms of things existing in the Word. For by beholding the Word, they know not merely the being of things as existing in the Word, but the being as possessed by the things themselves. As God, by contemplating himself, sees that being which things have in their own nature. It be called evening knowledge, insofar as when the angels behold the Word, they know the being which things have in their proper nature. Then the morning and the evening knowledge are essentially one and the same, and only differ as to the things known. If it be called evening knowledge, insofar as through innate ideas they know the being which things have in their own natures, then the morning and the evening knowledge differ. Thus Augustine seems to understand it when he assigns one as inferior to the other. Reply to objection 1. The 6 days, as Augustine understands them, are taken as the 6 classes of things known by the angels, so that the day's unit is taken according to the unit of the thing understood, which nevertheless can be apprehended by various ways of knowing it. Reply to objection 2. There can be 2 operations of the same faculty at the one time, one of which is referred to the other, as is evident when the will at the same time wills the end and the means to the end, and the intellect at the same instant perceives principles and conclusions through those principles when it has already acquired knowledge. As St. Augustine says, the evening knowledge is referred to the morning knowledge in the angels. Hence, there is nothing to hinder both from being at the same time in the angels. Reply to objection 3. On the coming of what is perfect, the opposite imperfect is done away, just as faith, which is of the things that are not seen, is made void when vision succeeds. But the imperfection of the evening knowledge is not opposed to the perfection of the morning knowledge, for that a thing be known in itself is not opposite to its being known in its cause. Nor again is there any inconsistency in knowing a thing through 2 mediums, one of which is more perfect and the other less perfect, just as we can have a demonstrative and probable medium for reaching the same conclusion. In like manner, a thing can be known by the angel through the uncreated word and through an innate idea. The will of the angels, 4 articles. In the next place, we must treat of things concerning the will of the angels. In the first place, we shall treat of the will itself, secondly of its movement, which is love. Under the first heading, there are 4 points of inquiry. 1. Whether there is will in the angels. 2. Whether the will of the angel is his nature or his intellect. 3. Is there free will in the angels? 4. Is there an irascible and concupiscible appetite in them? Question. Whether there is will in the angels. Objection 1. It would seem that there is no will in the angels, for as the philosopher Aristotle says, the will is in the reason, but there is no reason in the angels, but something higher than reason. Therefore, there is no will in the angels, but something higher than the will. Objection 2. Further, the will is comprised under the appetite, as is evident from the philosopher Aristotle, but the appetite argues something imperfect because it is a desire of something not as yet possessed. Therefore, since there is no imperfection in the angels, especially in the blessed ones, it seems that there is no will in them. Objection 3. Further, the philosopher says that the will is a mover which is moved, for it is moved by the appetible object understood. Now the angels are movable, since they are incorporeal, therefore there is no will in the angels. On the contrary, Augustine says that the image of the Trinity is found in the soul according to memory, understanding, and will. But God's image is found not only in the soul of man, but also in the angelic mind, since it is also capable of knowing God. Therefore, there is will in the angels. I answer that we must necessarily place a will in the angels. In evidence thereof, it must be borne in mind that, since all things flow from the divine will, all things in their own way are inclined by appetite towards good, but in different ways. Some are inclined to good by their natural inclination, without knowledge, as plants and inanimate bodies. Such inclination towards good is called a natural appetite. Others, again, are inclined towards good, but with some knowledge. Not that they know the aspect of goodness, but that they apprehend some particular good, as in the sense, which knows the sweet, the white, and so on. The inclination which follows this apprehension is called a sensitive appetite. Other things, again, have an inclination towards good, but with a knowledge whereby they perceive the aspect of goodness. This belongs to the intellect. This is most perfectly inclined towards what is good, not indeed as if it were merely guided by another towards some particular good only, like things devoid of knowledge, nor towards some particular good only, as things which have only sensitive knowledge, but as inclined towards good in general. Such inclination is termed will. Accordingly, since the angels by their intellect know the universal aspect of goodness, it is manifest that there is a will in them. Reply to Objection 1. Reason surpasses sense in a different way from that in which intellect surpasses reason. Reason surpasses sense according to the diversity of the objects known. For sense judges of particular objects, while reason judges of universals. Therefore there must be one appetite tending towards good in the abstract, which appetite belongs to reason, and another with a tendency towards particular good, which appetite belongs to sense. But intellect and reason differ as to their manner of knowing, because the intellect knows by simple intuition, while reason knows by a process of discursion from one thing to another. Nevertheless, by such discursion, reason comes to know what intellect learns without it, namely the universal. Consequently, the object presented to the appetite faculty on the part of reason and on the part of intellect is the same. Therefore, in the angels, who are purely intellectual, there is no appetite higher than the will. Reply to Objection 2. Although the name of the appetite part is derived from seeking things not yet possessed, the appetitive part reaches out to these things only, but also to many other things. Thus the name of a stone, lapis, is derived from injuring the foot, lesion pedis, though not this alone belongs to a stone. In the same way, the irascible faculty is so denominated from anger, ira, though at the same time there are several other passions in it, as hope, daring, and the rest. Reply to Objection 3. The will is called a mover which is moved, according as to will and to understand are termed movements of a kind, and there is nothing to prevent movement of this kind from existing in the angels, since such movement is the act of a perfect agent, as stated in De Anima 3, text 28. Next question, whether in the angels the will differs from the intellect. Objection 1. It would seem that in the angel the will does not differ from the intellect and from the nature, for an angel is more simple than a natural body. But a natural body is inclined through its form towards its end, which is its good. Therefore, much more so is the angel. Now the angel's form is either the nature in which he subsists, or else it is some species within his intellect. Therefore, the angel inclines towards the good through his own nature or through an intelligible species, but such inclination towards the good belongs to the will. Therefore, the will of the angel does not differ from his nature or his intellect. Objection 2. Further, the object of the intellect is the true, while the object of the will is the good. Now the good and the true differ, not really, but only logically. Therefore, will and intellect are not really different. Objection 3. Further, the distinction of common and proper does not differentiate the faculties, for the same power of sight perceives color and whiteness. But the good and the true seem to be mutually related as common to particular, for the true is particular good, to wit, of the intellect. Therefore the will, whose object is the good, does not differ from the intellect whose object is the true. On the contrary, the will in the angels regard good things only, while their intellect regards both good and bad things, for they know both. Therefore the will of the angels is distinct from their intellect. I answer that in the angels the will is a special faculty or power, which is neither their nature nor their intellect. That it is not their nature is manifest from this, that the nature or essence of a thing is completely comprised within it. Whatever, then, extends to anything beyond it is not its essence. Hence, we see in natural bodies that the inclination to being does not come from anything superadded to the essence, but from the matter which desires being before possessing it, and from the form which keeps it in such being when once it exists. But the inclination towards something extrinsic comes from something superadded to the essence, as tendency to a place comes from gravity or lightness, while the inclination to make something like itself comes from the active qualities. Now the will has a natural tendency towards good. Consequently, there alone are essence and will identified where all good is contained within the essence of him who wills. That is to say, in God, who wills nothing beyond himself except on account of his goodness. This cannot be said of any creature, because infinite goodness is quite foreign to the nature of any created thing. Accordingly, neither the will of the angel nor that of any creature can be the same thing as its essence. In like manner, neither can the will be the same thing as the intellect of angel or man, because knowledge comes about in so far as the object known is within the knower. Consequently, the intellect extends itself to what is outside it, according as what, in its essence, is outside, it is disposed to be somehow within it. On the other hand, the will goes out to what is beyond it, according as by a kind of inclination it tends, in a manner, to what is outside it. Now it belongs to one faculty to have within itself something which is outside it, and to another faculty to tend to what is outside it. Consequently, intellect and will must necessarily be different powers in every creature. It is not so with God, for he has within himself universal being and the universal good. Therefore, both intellect and will are his nature. Reply to objection 1. A natural body is moved to its own being by its substantial form, while it is inclined to something outside by something additional, as has been said. Reply to objection 2. Faculties are not differentiated by any material difference of their objects, but according to their formal distinction, which is taken from the nature of the object as such. Consequently, the diversity derived from the notion of good and true suffices for the difference of intellect from will. Reply to objection 3. Because the good and the true are really convertible, it follows that the good is apprehended by the intellect as something true, while the true is desired by the will as something good. Nevertheless, the diversity of their aspects is sufficient for diversifying the faculties, as was said above. Next question: whether there is free will in the angels? Objection 1. It would seem that there is no free will in the angels, for the act of free will is to choose. But there can be no choice with the angels, because choice is the desire of something after taking counsel, while counsel is a kind of inquiry, as stated in Ethic 3, line 3. But the angel's knowledge is not the result of inquiring, for this belongs to the discursiveness of reason. Therefore it appears that there is no free will in the angels. Objection 2. Further, free will implies indifference to alternatives. But in the angels, on the part of their intellect, there is no such indifference, because, as was observed already, their intellect is not deceived as to things which are naturally intelligible to them. Therefore, neither on the part of their appetitive faculty can there be free will. Objection 3. Further, the natural endowments of the angels belong to them according to degrees of more or less, because in the higher angels the intellectual nature is more perfect than in the lower, but the free will does not admit of degrees, therefore there is no free will in them. On the contrary, free will is part of man's dignity, but the angel's dignity surpasses that of men. Therefore, since free will is in men, with much more reason is it in the angels. I answer that some things there are which act, not from any previous judgment, but as it were, moved and made to act by others, just as the arrow is directed to the target by the archer. Others act from some kind of judgment, but not from free will, such as irrational animals. For the sheep flies from the wolf by a kind of judgment whereby it esteems to be hurtful to itself. Such a judgment is not a free one, but implanted by nature. Only an agent endowed with an intellect can act with a judgment which is free, insofar as it apprehends the common note of goodness, from which it can judge this or the other thing to be good. Consequently, wherever there is intellect, there is free will. It is therefore manifest that just as there is intellect, so is there free will in the angels, and in a higher degree of perfection than in man. Reply to Objection 1. The philosopher Aristotle is speaking of choice as it is in man. A man's estimate in speculative matters differs from an angel's in this, that the one needs not to inquire, while the other does so need. So is it in practical matters. Hence there is choice in the angels, yet not with the inquisitive deliberation of counsel, but by the sudden acceptance of truth. Reply to Objection 2. As was observed already, knowledge is effected by the presence of the known within the knower. Now, it is a mark of imperfection in anything not to have within it what it should naturally have. Consequently, an angel would not be perfect in his nature if his intellect were not determined to every truth which he can know naturally. But the act of the appetitive faculty comes of this, that the affection is directed to something outside. Yet the perfection of a thing does not come from everything to which it is inclined, but only from something which is higher than it. Therefore, it does not argue imperfection in an angel if his will be not determined with regard to things beneath him, but it would argue imperfection in him with he to be indeterminate to what is above him. Reply to Objection 3. Free will exists in a nobler manner in the higher angels than it does in the lower, as also does the judgment of the intellect. Yet it is true that liberty, insofar as the removal of compulsion is considered, is not susceptible of greater and lesser degree, because privations and negations are not lessened nor increased directly of themselves, but only by their cause or through the addition of some qualification. The next question, whether there is an irascible and a concupiscible appetite in the angels. Objection 1. It would seem that there is an irascible and a concupiscible appetite in the angels, for Dionysius says that in the demons there is unreasonable fury and wild concupiscence. But demons are of the same nature as angels, for sin has not altered their nature. Therefore, there is an irascible and a concupiscible appetite in the angels. Objection 2. Further, love and joy are in the concupiscible, while anger, hope and fear are in the irascible appetite. But in the sacred scriptures, these things are attributed both to the good and to the wicked angels. Therefore, there is an irascible and a concupiscible appetite in the angels. Objection 3. Further, some virtues are said to reside in the irascible appetite and some in the concupiscible. Thus, charity and temperance appear to be in the concupiscible, while hope and fortitude are in the irascible. But these virtues are in the angels. Therefore, there is both a concupiscible and an irascible appetite in the angels. On the contrary, the philosopher Aristotle says that the irascible and concupiscible are in the sensitive part, which does not exist in angels. Consequently, there is no irascible or concupiscible appetite in the angels. I answer that the intellective appetite is not divided into irascible and concupiscible. Only the sensitive appetite is so divided. The reason of this is because, since the faculties are distinguished from one another not according to the material, but only by the formal distinction of objects, if to any faculty there respond an object according to some common idea, there will be no distinction of faculties according to the diversity of the particular thing contained under that common idea. Just as, if the proper object of the power of sight be color as such, then there are not several powers of sight distinguished according to the difference of black and white. Whereas, if the proper object of any faculty were white as white, then the faculty of seeing white would be distinguished from the faculty of seeing black. Now, it is quite evident from what has been said that the object of the intellective appetite, otherwise known as the will, is good according to the common aspect of goodness, nor can there be any appetite except of what is good. Hence, in the intellective part, the appetite is not divided according to the distinction of some particular good things, as the sensitive appetite is divided, which does not crave for what is good according to its common aspect, but for some particular good object. Accordingly, since there exists in the angels only an intellective appetite, their appetite is not distinguished into irascible and concupiscible, but remains undivided, and it is called the will. Reply to Objection 1. Fury and concupiscence are metaphorically said to be in the demons, as anger is sometimes attributed to God, on account of the resemblance in the effect. Reply to Objection 2. Love and joy, insofar as their passions, are in the concupiscible appetite, but insofar as they express a simple act of the will, they are in the intellective part. In this sense, to love is to wish well to anyone, and to be glad is for the will to repose in some good possessed. Universally speaking, none of these things is said of the angels, as by way of passions, as Augustine says. Reply to Objection 3. Charity is a virtue, is not in the concupiscible appetite, but in the will, because the object of the concupiscible appetite is the good as delectable to the senses, but the divine goodness, which is the object of charity, is not of any such kind. For the same reason, it must be said that hope does not exist in the irascible appetite, because the object of the irascible appetite is something arduous belonging to the sensible order, which the virtue of hope does not regard, since the object of hope is arduous and divine. Temperance, however, considered as a human virtue, deals with the desires of sensible pleasures, which belong to the concupiscible faculty. Similarly, fortitude regulates daring and fear, which reside in the irascible part. Consequently, temperance, insofar as it is a human virtue, resides in the concupiscible part, and fortitude in the irascible. But they do not exist in the angels in this manner, for in them there are no passions of concupiscence, nor of fear and daring, to be regulated by temperance and fortitude. But temperance is predicated of them according as in the moderation they display their will, in conformity with the divine will. Fortitude is likewise attributed to them, in so far as they firmly carry out the divine will. All of this is done by their will, and not by the irascible or concupiscible appetite. we head over to the next video for Treatise 63 to 64, where Thomas Aquinas will talk about the punishment of the demons. Yeah, what about those fallen angels? Please do hit the like button, share with your friends and family of like mind, and subscribe to the channel.